Hey guys. Tonight, we descend into a place where the shadows cling a little tighter and the air tastes like burnt offerings and old promises. You're standing at the edge of a cavernous opening, just a hairline crack in the jagged black rock butt it breathes. It exhales cold mist and something that smells like sulfur and singed wool. You already know. Somehow, without anyone saying it, that this is an entrance to the underworld. Welcome to Hades. You probably won't survive this, but then again, you didn't pack a snack either. So who's really to blame? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I always love seeing who's drifting off with me from across the globe. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step forward, and the rock mouth of the cave yawns wider, as if beckoning you into its throat. The world behind you dims. The sky snuffs itself out. No torches light your way. But something deeper than sight pulls you in. You follow the path downward, the earth growing softer underfoot. Almost like warm clay. Your breath fogs in front of you, though. Oddly, the air isn't cold. And then, a sound. A thud. Then a snarl. Then 3 snarls, rising in stereo from all sides. Cerberus, there he stands or sprawls. Really, the 3-headed guardian of the underworld. A shaggy mass of fur, fangs, and feral drool. One head is asleep. One's gnawing on a charred femur. And the third? Oh, that one's staring right at you. And you do not pass unless you've got a VIP invitation from Hades himself or a ball. A really good ball. In Greek mythology, Cerberus is the ultimate bouncer, Hades' personal security system, tasked with keeping the dead in and the living out. His name means spotted, which, honestly, is the most hilariously mundane name for a hellbeast. Historians still argue whether this was intentional irony or just another case of ancient humor that didn't age well. Imagine naming a dragon Fluffy. You try to tiptoe past. One paw twitches. A growl bubbles. The head that had been chewing now lifts meat, still dangling, and its gaze joins the first. You freeze. But then you remember. Orpheus got past. So did Heracles. Heck, even Aeneas managed it, and he wasn't even Greek. How hard could it be? Apparently, harder than it looked. You fumble in your pooch weight. When did you even get a pouch and pull out something? Spherical, shiny, bouncy. You throw it. All 3 heads snap around. You dash past, skidding on damp obsidian, your foot crunching something that hopefully wasn't someone's femur. The dog doesn't follow. You're in. Barely. Behind you, Cerberus settles back down with a huff that smells like burnt toast and old shoes. Ahead of you, the underworld unfolds, vast fields of asphodel swaying like pale wheat, rivers that mumble to themselves, and a feeling like someone is brushing cobwebs over your skin. Here, the souls of the dead wander in dreamlike loops. Some mumble regrets. Others reenact the worst moment of their lives on repeat. Like the world's most depressing GIF, you walk carefully, nodding politely to a man trying to roll a boulder upilise. That's Sisyphus. Still at it. No, he doesn't want help. Fringe detail time. Some ancient sources say there were actually 2 or even 4 rivers flowing through Hades. Depending on the version, the river Styx gets all the fame, but don't forget about Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. A sip from that one, and poof, no memories. No, guilt. No remembering your Netflix password. Historians still debate whether the underworld was imagined as a literal subterranean realm or more of a symbolic mental map of afterlife anxiety. After all, why would the dead need rivers or fields? Why would there be judges in robes, weighing your soul like it's checkout day at a fish market? You pass by a sleeping figure with wings, probably Hypnos, god of sleep. His twin brother, Thanatos, handles the dying part. Hypnos just wants people to chill. Honestly, you'd get along. But now's not the time for naps. You move deeper, toward a darker, older part of Hades. The shadows thicken. The air turns syrupy. You swear the walls are whispering. And then laughter, dry and echoing. There's something ahead. Not another soul. Something worse. But we'll save that for the next step in this journey. For now, you've tiptoed past the most famous guard dog in mythology. You've crossed into the land of the dead, which, let's be honest, is basically just the ancient Greek version of an eternal DMV line. You've avoided getting turned into kibble and witnessed the eternal futility of rock pushing, and you're still walking. Barely. The laughter grows louder. It doesn't echo like a person's, more like brittle leaves crunching underfoot or bones clinking in a box. You follow it. Because of course you do. You're in the underworld. Curiosity, clearly outweighing caution at this point. The passage narrows, lined with pillars etched in unfamiliar script, curling like vines around the stone. A faint glow pulses ahead. Flickering orange and green like firelight, passed through moss, you emerge into a crumbled stone courtyard overtaken by ivy and decay. In its center, a shattered temple. Roof half collapsed. Marble, stained dark by centuries of sorrow. The laughter stops. Inside, something shifts. You step in, and the air changes. It's damp and heavy with mildew, and something sharper like old copper coins or the smell of blood that dried long ago. The ground crunches beneath your sandals, and you glance down to see what looks like pebbles. They are not pebbles. You freeze. They are fingers, toes, bits of statues. You tell yourself, definitely just statues. Except they aren't marble. And one of them still has a ring on it. You found her. She's at the far end of the temple. Barely lit by the smoldering glow of oil, lamps those somehow still burn. Her hair rustles and hisses. Alive and moving of its own will. You'd hope the stories exaggerated. They didn't. Medusa. Her back is turned, draped in a heavy, tattered robe. Shoulders tense. You don't speak, because every cell in your body screams not to. Instead, you hold your breath and inch sideways, just enough to glimpse her profile. She is beautiful, not in the classical, goddess on a vase way, but in the tragic, wronged, furious way. Her eyes shimmer faintly, unblinking. Her expression is tired. Her lips do not smile, but they are not snarling either. Her face, like her legend, carries weight. The snakes in her hair flick their tongues and whisper things you cannot hear. One lifts and looks directly at you. She doesn't. Yet. In mythology, Medusa wasn't always a monster. According to Ovid, she was once a mortal priestess of Athena, famed for her beauty, depending on which version you prefer. She was either seduced or assaulted by Poseidon in Athena's temple. And as punishment, yes, punishment, Athena transformed her into the snake-haired creature whose gaze turned people to stone. Historians still argue whether this reflects patriarchal storytelling, a misinterpreted religious metaphor, or just classic Greek blame-shifting. You creep sideways. Past. More half-fused figuresmen with open mouths frozen mid-scream. Women mid-step. Eyes forever wide. Some are armless. Others look like they simply sank to their knees and gave up. A few seem to have tried to crawl away, trailing stony handprints across the dusty floor. Then Medusa speaks. "I can smell you?" 1. Her voice is low. Calm. Not angry. Not yet. You freeze. "I don't turn everyone," she murmurs. Still, not facing you. Only the ones who think they deserve to win. Oh. You realize then that Medusa's curse was never just a punishment. It was armor. A warning. A final defense. The ultimate boundaries. Look. And you're done. You lower your gaze and inch backward. Her snakes calm. One yawns. Another curls around her neck like a tired cat. She doesn't move. Maybe she's grown tired of visitors. Maybe she wants to be left alone. Maybe you're the first person who didn't try to kill her. Quirky tidbit. In some obscure variants of the myth, Medusa's blood had dual powers. Blood from her right side could heal, while blood from her left side could destroy. Ancient cheat code. Basically, it's not clear how anyone figured that out without turning into decorative patio furniture. But you can't exactly ask her. You reach the edge of the doorway again. The sunlight, or whatever approximation of it exists, her flares faintly. You step out without looking back. Behind you. A sigh. She let you go. Out in the open. The wind scrapes dust across your face. You wipe your brow. Still clammy. That could have gone much worse. As you descend the crumbling temple steps, you remember how Perseus supposedly defeated Medusa mirror shield. Sneaky angle. Classic decapitation. But the myths rarely mention what happened after. That her severed head continued to turn things to stone. That even in death, she was dangerous. That Athena strapped it to her shield like a badge of terror and triumph. Historians still debate whether the myth of Medusa served more to vilify women's rage or to embody divine protection. Either way, she became something more than a monster. She became a symbol. And now, you've met her. Not slain, not escaped. Just passed through. Your heart starts to settle again, beating a little slower. Your legs carry you through the scrub and stone, away from her temple, into the unknown curves of Hades' domain. You didn't turn to stone. You didn't even cry. Although that one moment when a snake lunged your way did almost wring a yelp out of you. Almost. But the underworld isn't done with you yet. Not even close. The deeper you go, the weirder it gets. And next, let's just say you should brush up on your hydrology skills. Because there's a swamp ahead, and something in it is bubbling with a lot more heads than you're prepared for. The underworld shifts under your feet again. The dusty stone gives way to something wetter, damp soil. Slick with muck. The kind of ground that tries to eat your sandals and makes an absolutely terrible sound when you lift your foot. Slur. Slur. You're ankle deep in it before you can protest. The air smells like rotten eggs had a fight with a compost pile and lost. You're now in the swamp, somewhere nearby. Something splashes. Something heavy. You squint through the mist. There's a faint, greenish glow rippling through the fog. Like sickly moonlight, reflecting off water that definitely shouldn't glow. And then you hear it. The unmistakable sound of something hissing, but not a gentle snake hiss. This one's deeper. Wet. And plural. The Lernaean Hydra. Oh good. She or Ida's coiled in the middle of the swamp. Half submerged. Half draped over blackened roots and twisted cypress knees. Multiple necks ripple and twist like living vines, each ending in a serpentine head. One drinks from the water lazily. Another gnaws on a tree. A third is staring at you like you're the next snack on a very cursed charcuterie board. According to legend, this swamp was once a sacred place until Hera, queen of the gods and drama queen extraordinaire, placed the Hydra here to terrorize the countryside. Its breath was poisonous, its blood corrosive, and every time someone cut off a head, two more grew back. Historians still argue whether the Hydra originated as a symbol of overwhelming natural forces or was just a mythological way of saying, some problems get worse the more you try to fix them. You take a step back, and the water ripples. The closest head rises, blinking double eyelids like a lizard. It snorts, and a spray of steam hits your cheek. It smells like moldy fish, stew, and despair. Charming. Fun fringe detail. One version of the myth claims the Hydra had immortal central heads that couldn't be cut off at all. So, even if you scorched and slashed your way through the others, that last one would just glare at you eternally. Like a passive-aggressive roommate who eats your leftovers and denies it. You glance down. Your weapon? A stick. Great. You throw it. The Hydra head nearest you jerks its neck, snatches the stick mid-air, and snaps it with a crunch that makes your spine hum. It doesn't roar, doesn't chase, just watches. You decide not to run. Running in swamps is famously ineffective unless you're a cartoon character. Instead, you slide behind a gnarled stump and whisper a desperate pep talk to yourself. You are not a demigod. You are not Heracles. But you are annoyingly persistent. Speaking of Heracles, he famously fought the Hydra as one of his 12 labors. His solution? Bring a friend his nephew, Iolausu, burned each neck stump before it could regrow. Teamwork makes the dream work. Even in mythological pest control. You reach into your pouch, again, how is this pouch so convenient, and find something that smells vaguely of oil and panic. A torch stub. You strike it against a rock. It flickers to life. And for a second, the Hydra recoils. Fiery. Remembers fire You don't fight. You don't swing. You just hold it steady. And walk. One head hisses. Another lunges, but not too close. They all remember what fire did last time. Maybe. Just maybe. They think you're back for round 2. Maybe you're a ghost of Heracles. Maybe monsters dream. And you've wandered into their nightmare. You wade past, heart clenching like a fist. One soggy step at a time. The Hydra watches you from the mist. Heads twitching, but none strike. Eventually, the ground rises. The mud gives way to cracked rock. Your feet are free. You turn back. Slowly, the Hydra melts back into the swamp, heads disappearing one by one, like it was never there. Historians still debate whether the Hydra represents some ecological catastrophe like an ancient allegory for marsh fever or malaria. Or perhaps it's simply a symbol of overwhelming dread. The kind that multiplies in your mind. The more you try to suppress it, all you know is that it smelled terrible, and you never want to be near that many necks again. You shake the muck from your boots and continue. The landscape ahead turns rocky, and you hear the distant caw of gulls. That's not promising. You're nowhere near a beacher. Wait. Are you? A breeze brushes your cheek. It's salty. You're approaching the sea. And not just any stretch of water this one churns. It sloshes. It slurps. You hear what sounds like a whirlpool clearing its throat. And is that a scream? You're about to meet 2 legendary maritime monstrosities. But first, maybe find something that floats. Or at least say goodbye to dry socks. You follow the path as it narrows into a craggy ledge, slick with sea mist and speckled with barnacle-crusted bones. The underworld, apparently, includes coastal property. Who knew? Below you, waves churn with a strange rhythm like something is breathing beneath them. The cliffs groan. The wind moans. Somewhere, you think you hear the faint crunch of a ship breaking apart. Ahead lies a narrow strait, just enough room for one vessel to slip through. Barely. The water is dark, pulled constantly in 2 directions. On your left, a gaping whirlpool spirals with eerie precision. On your right, a jagged cliff that drips with moss and mystery. You've arrived at the infamous passage between Charybdis and Scylla. And there's no ferry service. In the myths, this spot was a sailor's worst nightmare. Choose one side, and you risk being sucked down into a foaming, bottomless vortex. Choose the other, and you're picked off by a 6-headed, cliff-dwelling horror who dangles her victims like decorative charms. It's like being asked to pick between being flushed or chewed. You edge toward the rocky side, hugging the wall. Your foot skims a wet ledge slippery, narrow, and deeply disrespectful to human balance. The roar of water to your left pulses louder. That's Charybdis, the ancient whirlpool beast. She doesn't have a face. Exactly. Just a hungry mouth that opens 3 times a day and swallows everything within reach. That includes ships, heroes, and, once, Zeus's patience. Fringe fact. Some ancient texts suggest Charybdis was once a sea goddess who got too greedy, stealing land for her father Poseidon. As punishment, Zeus cast her into the sea and made her a monster. Scholars still debate whether she was ever meant to be fully personified, or just a mythological explanation for tidal currents that loved wrecking boats. You look up. Scylla's side is no better. There, half camouflaged among the jagged stone outcroppings, something shifts. A long, pale tentacle curls from a crevice, slick and slow. Then another, and another. They twitch with an intelligence you'd rather not think about. Scylla, they say, has 12 feet, 6 necks, and a bark like a yelping dog. Cute description. Until you realize each head has 3 rows of teeth and 0 sense of diplomacy. Homer's Odyssey tells how Odysseus chose to sail closer to Scylla knowing he'd lose 6 men but save his ship. Brutal math, but better than getting all of them sucked into the drink like soggy breadcrumbs. Historians still argue if the myth represents real-world sea dangers or something deeper, an ancient parable about choosing the lesser evil. You press yourself to the cliff face, keeping your eyes up and your limbs close. You're not Odysseus, but you can play the quiet card. Don't draw attention. Don't. A sudden lung. One of Scylla's heads drops from above, jaws snapping where your head was half a second ago. You duck. Knees scraping rock. Another head screeches and lunges again. You roll. Your shirt tears. Your heartbeat might be heard from orbit. Then silence. No splash. No more lunges. Maybe it was a warning. Maybe you looked inedible. Maybe someone else just got unlucky somewhere behind you. You don't check. You scramble past the narrowest point of the strait. Charybdis belches behind you, a giant bubble of air rising before the whirlpool collapses in on itself, gurgling with grim satisfaction. Scylla retreats into her cliff crevice, limbs curling back like some deeply traumatizing sea anemone. You're through. Your hands tremble as you lower yourself onto a rock that isn't crumbling or hissing or trying to bite. That's progress. You breathe. You glance back at the strait, now deceptively calm, like it's pretending none of that just happened. The sea does that sometimes. Pretends it's your friend, until it suddenly decides you're the garnish. Another quirky detail? Some versions of the myth describe Scylla as a beautiful nymph, cursed into monstrosity by a jealous rival, usually Circe, who really did not play well with others. Which raises the question, how many Greek monsters were just victims of god-level pettiness? You stand up, knees wobbling slightly, and resume your journey. Your sandals are soaked. You smell like seawater and stress. But you're still here. The path veers inland again, winding through sun-bleached hills dotted with ruins. You climb a set of cracked stone steps that once led to something grand, now just columns and silence. A lone bird cries overhead, which is both comforting and creepy. You press on. Far ahead, sitting on a raised platform in the middle of a dusty road, is a large figure-part lion, part woman, with vast wings tucked neatly behind her. Her eyes are narrowed, and she's smiling in a way that suggests she knows something you don't, and that, unfortunately, is correct. Because now it's riddle time. The road flattens into a wide stone causeway, and the heat beats down in waves. Not the humid underworld steam you're used to by now, but dry, bright, the kind that gets into your bones and saps your energy with a smug little chuckle. You squint into the distance, where the figure you saw earlier hasn't moved an inch, which would be comforting if she didn't look like a sphinx straight out of an ancient fever dream. And yep, she is. The Greek sphinx isn't quite the same as the Egyptian one. You might be picturing stoic and giant and mysteriously silent. No. This one talks. She loves talking. Specifically, she loves asking riddles. And if you don't get the answer right, she eats you. System. You approach carefully. Her lion body stretches with slow grace, claws flexing in the dust. Her wings twitch once, sending a little puff of grit into your eyes. She yawns like a cat that's been napping too long, then grins down at you. It's not a warm grin. Traveler. She purrs. What walks on 4 legs in the morning? 2 legs at noon. And 3 legs in the evening? You blink. That one's familiar. It's the riddle. The one from the legend of Oedipus. The classic. You take a slow breath. Man, you say, crawls as a baby, walks upright as an adult, and uses a cane in old age. There's a pause. Then she looks. Frankly, a little miffed. Yes, that one. She mutters. Everyone knows that one now. Internet ruins everything. Oh. You try not to laugh. She narrows her eyes. Fine, she says. Let's make it interesting. Oh no, riddle me this. I go up, but never down. I'm always moving, but I never leave the ground. What am I? You blink. You chew your lip. Time? No. Not quite right. Shadow? Maybe. But before you can guess, she leans in. Her breath suspiciously sweet-smelling like dates gone sour. Tick-tock, she says, clearly enjoying this. Or should I say, chomp-chomp? Quick, quirky aside. In some obscure versions of the myth, the Sphinx's riddles weren't limited to one. Say she had a whole repertoire, collected from philosophers, poets, or just bored immortals with too much time. Historians still argue whether her myth reflects an actual oral riddle tradition, or if she was simply the world's most aggressive game show host. You throw out a guess. A river. M. She pauses, then smiles. Well played. She nods. You may pass. You exhale, a breath you didn't realize you were holding, and take a cautious step forward. She watches you go, tail flicking like a metronome. As you pass behind her, you notice something the myths never mention: bones. Hundreds of them, arranged in patterns. Some picked clean, others fresh. And in the very center, a little pile of books. Old scrolls, clay tablets, even a half-charred paperback with a cracked spine. Apparently, the Sphinx is also a bit of a reader, probably looking for new material. You hurry along. Another fun detail, in Thebes, where the Sphinx supposedly perched, her defeat by Oedipus was seen not just as a personal triumph, but a societal one, the end of chaos, the restoration of order. Her riddles weren't just tests, they were symbols of instability, testing humanity's worthiness to continue. So yeah, no pressure or anything. The path soon narrows again, and rocky cliffs rise on either side. You're officially back in monster territory. You haven't slept, haven't eaten, and your nerves are being held together with metaphorical duct tape and a little pride. But still you're upright, riddle-free, and largely undevoured. You crest a ridge and stop short. The ground is scorched black. Tresif, you can even call them, that are charred and leafless. Their branches twisted like hands mid-scream. The air smells like burnt fur and something acrid you can't quite place. There's a shape on the horizon. Massive. Smoking. Moving. You've just walked into the territory of Typhone, the literal storm beast of Greek mythology, the god-monster hybrid who made even Zeus panic-hand. Zeus doesn't panic unless someone messes with his lightning bolt collection. Typhon isn't subtle. He's a walking natural disaster with wings, fire breath, and serpents for legs. You know, standard issue for terrifying primeval chaos incarnate. And guess what? It says you, so maybe don't riddle this one. The ground rumbles before he even steps into view. You freeze, instantly regretting every footstep, every riddle, every swamp squelch that led you here. Smoke rolls past your knees. And overhead, the sky seems to flicker like even the weather doesn't want to be near what's coming. Then you see him. Typhon. And no, you're not hallucinating. You're also not ready. He stands taller than a mountain literally. Shoulders scrape the sky. His arms stretch like bridges between continents. His fingers are snakes, coiling and writhing independently where legs should be. There are more serpents, thick and muscular, slithering him forward with glacial, volcanic certainty. His wings are torn clouds laced with lightning. And his face? That's hard to explain without sounding like you're exaggerating. But try nightmare earthquake with eyes. The air turns electric. Your teeth hurt. Your heartbeat becomes percussion. Typhon is, according to the oldest myths, the final son of Gaia, Earth herself. She birthed him to punish the Olympians for defeating the Titans, because nothing says maternal revenge like dropping a walking extinction event on your enemies. Historians still argue whether Typhon was ever meant to be a single entity or a personification of multiple natural catastrophes, volcanoes, storms, earthquakes all rolled into one very loud scream. You duck behind a boulder. Not that it would help. If Typhon so much as sneezes, that rock's going to another dimension. He bellowsone of those howls you don't just hear. You feel? Your organs briefly question their loyalty to your ribcage. The sky responds with a jagged crack of thunder that splits the clouds open like an overripe melon. Ash rains down like black snow. And yet, here's the weirdest parts, not coming for you. Typhone. Lumber past. Heading toward some cosmic battlefield that you're apparently too insignificant to join. His serpents lash out occasionally, scorching the earth. His wings beat once just. One sand, the gust nearly knocks you down, but he doesn't turn. You get to watch. You get to breathe. Barely. Quirky tidbit. In the most famous version of the myth, Zeus battles Typhon directly hurling thunderbolts while Typhon throws mountains. At one point, Typhon tears the sinews from Zeus's hands and feet, gross. Yes, and stashes them in a cave. guarded by a she-dragon. Zeus only wins by recovering them and trapping Typhone beneath Mount Etna, which, coincidentally, is still an active volcano. Coincidence? Historians still debate that. 2. You creep along the edge of a charred ridge. Typhone vanishes into the distance, leaving scorched footprints the size of amphitheaters. The air remains heavy, crackling with aftershock. Even the rocks seem unsure if they should stay solid. You glance up at a nearby cliff, wall-blackened, yet covered in carvings, ancient graffiti, figures running, others praying. One seems to depict a god getting punted off a mountain like a soccer ball. You don't need translation to get the message. Typhone came. It was bad. Eventually the smoke clears, and you reach the mouth of a deep cave, cool and whispering with hidden echoes. And that's when it hits you, this must be Echidna's lair. Yes, that Echidna, Monster Mom Supreme. Because of course, the guy with snakes for legs would shack up with a woman whose entire job was birthing horrors. It's called balance, romance, division of terror-based labor. You enter the cave. It's not pitch black. There are patches of glowing fungus, and the walls pulse gently, as if alive. Nestled into alcoves are eggs. Lots of them. Some cracked. Some rocking ominously. One just made a sound like a goat sneezing underwater. You don't stick around to meet that one. In the far shadows, you see her Echidna, torso of a beautiful woman. From the waist up, snake below, long, shimmering tail that coils lazily. Her eyes glitter with maternal menace. She's humming. Not a lullaby. Something slower, deeper. You do not disturb her. You do not speak. You just pass through, holding your breath and trying very hard not to look like a threater, a babysitter. Fringe fact: Echidna and Typhone together produced a monstrous family tree that includes the Chimera, Cerberus, the Hydra, and even the Nemean lion. Basically, every monster you've narrowly avoided so far, her babies? Some sources suggest Echidna was immortal, never aging, never leaving her cave. Others claim she died in her sleep when a hero stabbed her through the heart. Scholars still argue whether she was revered, feared, or simply invented to explain where all these nightmares kept coming from. You finally step out the back of the cave and into sunlight, the closest thing this world allows. The air feels cleaner, the ground less cursed. For the first time in a while, you can breathe without wincing, and then you hear it. The snort, the stomp, the echo of hooves in stone corridors. Oh no. There's a maze ahead, and inside it, a bull-headed roommate with rage issues. The air shifts again, heavy with dust, and that oddly specific smell of old limestone and sweat-soaked leather. Ahead of you looms a structure that doesn't rise from the ground so much as squat, they're ancient, massive, and geometrically smug. The labyrinth. You already know what's inside. The stories weren't shy. The Minotaur, born of questionable royal choices and architectural overcompensation, the Minotaur is half man, half bull. All nightmare fuel. His name literally means Bull of Minos. And in Greek myth, he's the tragic result of a cursed queen falling in love with a bull. Long story short, do not accept divine dares. especially ones involving livestock. Historians still debate whether the entire myth is a metaphor for Minoan religious rituals or just an extremely detailed warning label on bad decision-making. You take your first step into the maze, and it's like slipping into another world. The light vanishes almost immediately, swallowed by thick stone walls that twist and curve with architectural spite. There are no signs, no sounds, just the echo of your own footsteps and something else. A faint snort, a distance cap, a rhythmic thudding that doesn't quite match your pace. The labyrinth, according to myth, was built by Daedalus, the original overachiever of Greek engineering, designed to be impossible to escape. Unless you had a spool of thread and a friend with good aim. You have neither. Left, right, left again. Dead end. Turn back. The passages twist in slow spirals. You pass the same mossy crack in a wall 3 times. You're either looping or the maze is watching. And then, just as your breath starts to hitch and your legs ache from turning corners that go nowhere, you hear it. A low, deep snort. Then hooves. Not galloping. Not panicked, just calm. Confident steps. It's like he knows you're here. Knows you're lost. Knows you'll get tired first. And you will. The Minotaur appears slowly from the shadows. Not charging. Just arriving. Towering. Broad-shouldered. His head swaying slightly. Curved horns, gleaming in the faint light. His human torso is scarred. His bull face is surprisingly calm. He looks tired, and he smells like hay and blood and time. He doesn't roar, doesn't grunt, just waits. You back away, bumping into a wall that didn't exist a second ago. The maze shifts. It wants you to stay, or maybe it just wants an audience. In some versions of the myth, the Minotaur isn't just a brute beast that's tragic, trapped since birth, fed on sacrificial victims, feared and hated, and used as a political prop. Theseus, the so-called hero, only defeats him with help from Ariadne King Minos' daughter, who gives him a thread to find his way out. She gets abandoned later. By the way, typical hero behavior. You raise your hands. Not in defense. Just recognition. You're not here to fight. You're not Theseus. The Minotaur tilts his head. He steps aside. You don't question it. You walk past him. Spine stiff. Heart pounding. You don't look back. You don't run. You don't speak. And just like that, the maze opens. Sunlight tour underworld sunlight, which is more like beige ambient gloom, greets you as you step out into the open. Behind you, the labyrinth breathes in, then stills. The Minotaur doesn't follow. You survived a monster who spent centuries misunderstood. That counts for something. Ahead, the landscape is different again. You follow a cracked marble path that winds between dry hills. Strange humming fills the air, soft, layered, melodic, like wind through hollow bones. You round a bend and nearly trip over something you hoped you wouldn't see again. Snakes. Lots of them, coiled around a set of stone stairs, leading up to a ruined platform. 3 figures stand at the top, all with flowing robes and very active hairstyles. Gorgons, not just Medusa this time. Her sisters Theno and Euryale. Less famous. Arguably, angrier. Definitely just as dangerous. The myths say they're immortal. Unlike Medusa, who could be killed, her sisters are eternally furious and nearly indestructible. Some stories claim they live in remote caves. Their screams so powerful they shatter rock. Others say they walk among mortals, disguised, feeding the myths with new nightmares. You try not to blink too fast. They don't speak. They don't need to. The snakes do most of the talking, flicking, hissing, coiling, like punctuation. Fun fact, in art, the Gorgons were often depicted with tusks and lolling tongues before the Renaissance cleaned up their image. They weren't just scary, they were ugly scary. The kind of creature ancient artists drew when they really didn't want to be misunderstood. Historians still argue whether the Gorgons were meant as literal monsters or allegorious embodiments of feminine rage, sacred guardians of forbidden spaces, or just cautionary tales about peeking where you shouldn't. You lower your gaze. Not submissively, just respectfully. You edge around the stairs, avoiding eye contact with both snakes and sisters. One of them clicks her tongue. A snake flicks your elbow. But they let you go. Barely. You're back on the path again. Heart punching at your ribs. Ears ringing with all the things you almost saw. The underworld isn't done yet. Next up, monsters with wings and zero table manners. You walk now with quieter steps, like even your shadow is trying to shrink. The underworld's terrain shifts againless rock. More ruin. You pass broken columns, the skeletons of forgotten temples, and cracked reliefs that look like they were clawed from the inside out. The humming from earlier grows sharper, like wind slicing through hollow bronze. You're not alone. Feathers drift past your face. Not the soft, fluffy kind. These are jagged, tattered, stained. You look up, and there they are. The harpies. They perch like vultures on broken statues. Wings twitching in the heat. Bird bodies. Human faces, though human feels generous. Their expressions are permanently sour, like they're constantly smelling something offensive, which they usually are. In Greek mythology, the harpies were called the snatchers, originally spirits of sudden death, later retconned as storm-wind creatures who stole food, fouled it, or kidnapped people mid-bite, a kind of divine pest control. But with bad hygiene and worse manners, they notice you. One shrieks. Not loudly, but with that scratchy chalkboard rasp that makes your skin crawl. The others flutter their wings. You freeze. Mid-step, caught between flinching and fleeing. One drops something from her claws. It hits the ground with a sickening plop. A fruit? No. Not a fruit. Definitely not a fruit. You don't check. Just breathe through your mouth and keep moving. In the tale of King Phineas, the harpies tormented him daily by stealing or defiling his food. Every single meal. Imagine trying to enjoy breakfast while a winged goblin with a grudge swoops down to sneeze on your toast. The borid-swinged sons of the north wind were eventually called in to chase them away. Historians still debate whether this was an early moral parable about gluttony or just a poetic excuse for why your leftovers mysteriously disappear. You dodge a pile of bones and feathers, noticing the landscape is littered with half-eaten offerings as if the harpies never finish what they steal. Some creatures hoard treasure. These ones hoard trash. You slip past. Not running, but definitely picking up the pace. Then, as if to punctuate your escape, the terrain shifts once more. Fire. Heat. The earth beneath your feet rumbles with subtle tremors. You smell sulfur. The harpies disappear behind you. Like the wind swallowed them. Ahead. The ground splits into a narrow gorge. And something is moving within it. Something breathing fire. Something that is somehow lion, goat, and snake at the same time, the chimera. This is where your luck runs out and your metaphors start to sweat. The chimera is not just a monster. She's a fever dream stitched together from 3 angry animals and a volcano, typically described as having a lion's body, a goat's head sprouting from her back, and a serpent for a tail. She also breathes fire, because why not? She paces across the far side of the chasm, claws clicking against blackened stone, each step leaving a scorch mark. The goat head bleats ominously. The snake hisses, twitching like it's got opinions about your presence. The lion snarls. In mythology, the chimera was one of the children of Typhone and Echidna, because of course she was and terrorized the countryside of Lycia until Bellerophon flew in on Pegasus and killed her with a spear. That's the official story. Anyway, some fringe versions say she just disappeared into the mountains. Historians still argue whether she was an imported Anatolian goddess, demonized by myth, or just another sibling in the monster extended universe. You don't have a Pegasus. You have your feet. And they're currently very interested in moving in the opposite direction. You duck behind a rock, watching her circle. Her fire breath leaves a shimmering haze in the air. The rock beneath you is too warm. You backtrack, skirting the edge of the gorge until her gaze shifts elsewhere. You slip past, careful not to make noise, breathing through your teeth. Eventually, the landscape softens again. No more heat. No more fire. Just silence and shadow. You walk carefully, checking the corners of your vision. Your legs ash. Your mind hums. You've dodged a trash-loving vulture woman and a lava-spitting lion-goat hybrid in the same afternoon. And there's no trophy. Just more ground to cover. Ahead, the trees grow thicker, gnarled into unnatural shapes. The path bends toward a low, swampy basin. And the air chills. Something's watching you. Again. Not with fire or fangs this time. With a smile. Too many smiles. You're about to meet something less monstrous in form but far more personal. You descend into the basin slowly, like someone stepping onto a stage with no script. The air feels still, but not quiet. The trees seem to lean in, their twisted branches angled just enough to suggest they're listening. There's a pool at the bottom, dark and glassy, with no ripples, no wind here. Only your footsteps breaking the hush. You don't see her at first, just your reflection. But then it blinks. Medusa. You backpedal instinctively. The water's still unbroken, but your face still staring up at you with slightly different features. The cheekbones are sharper. The smile is wider. The eyes are wrong. And then the figure in the water shifts not like a person, but like a projection being swapped. One moment, she looks like you. The next, someone you loved. then feared, then envied. She changes as you watch, taking on shapes that feel uncomfortably familiar. That's her trick. In Greek lore, Medusa is a shapeshifter, a vampiric spirit who seduces travelers, then drinks their blood or, in some versions, eats them entirely. Ancient sources describe her with one brass leg and one donkey leg, which is honestly so specific it has to come from someone's weirdly vivid nightmare. Sometimes she's dispatched by Hecate, the goddess of witchcraft. Sometimes she acts alone. Historians still argue whether she was meant to terrify children into behaving or symbolize anxieties about women with agency. Either way, you'd rather she wasn't here. She steps from the trees. Finally, solid, tall, poised, smiling with polite hunger. Her dress shifts like liquid shadow. You don't run. You've learned. Running makes it worse. Instead, you nod. She tilts her head in return. Curious, like she's never met someone who didn't immediately bolt. Then she speaks, voice soft as a lullaby. You don't scare easy. You swallow. Her smile widens. That's new. Oh, she walks in slow circles around you, trailing fingers along your shoulder. Never quite touching. The reflection still changes. Now it's her. Now it's you. Now it's something in between. You stare into the pool and feel yourself fraying around the edges. You blink. Your reflection doesn't. She chuckles. Quirky detail. In Aristophanes, the frogs. Medusa is played for Laughsa, terrifying. Shape-shifting creature that a character exposes by questioning her form. It's the oldest surviving monster roast. The comedy may not translate perfectly now, but the idea of scaring something by naming it has deep roots. Naming the fear is power. Seeing through it. Even more so, you speak not to her, but to the pool. You're not me. You say, you're just wearing the idea of me. Huh. She pauses. The smile fades. True, she says, but sometimes that's all it takes. Oh. Then she turns, walks away, dissolves back into shadow. You don't chase. You don't need to. You've already passed. You exhale a breath that feels older than your lungs. You step away from the pool, careful not to look back. The trees clear. The path straightens. But the tension doesn't break, because now you're in the ruins of a palace. Tall columns lean at impossible angles. Tattered drapes flutter where there should be walls. And in the center of it all, resting on a throne made of broken cribs and collapsed cradles, is Lamia. She sees you instantly. Her eyes are sunken, but glowing. Her teeth too, many of them peek from beneath thin lips. Her fingers drum slowly on the bone armrest. Behind her, the wind carries a lullaby that never quite finishes. You try not to hear it. You already know the story. Lamia was once a queen of Libya. They say beloved by Zeus, which, as you've learned, is always the beginning of a tragedy. Hera, enraged, again, cursed Lamia to lose all her children. In some versions, she went mad with grief and began devouring the children of others. In others, she was transformed into a monster with a serpent's tail. The mother who became the hunter The lullaby turns sharp. You step closer. Unsure why. She doesn't move. Just watches. She's gaunt. Regal. Broken. A queen without a crown. A warning with teeth. Historians still debate whether Lamia was a pre-Greek figure absorbed into myth or a post-war maternal symbol twisted by cultural guilt. Either way, she became a scapegoat for grief too large to process. An ancient horror story to explain why bad things happen to small, helpless people. You feel her eyes on you, but there's no malice now, just sadness. She blinks once, slow, then closes her eyes. You step past her throne. She doesn't stir. The wind still sings, but softer. You've walked through shadows, now shadows that wear your face, and shadows that grieve for what they were. You climb out of the ruins as the light fades again. The horizon ahead is red dust and bone-colored cliffs. Something is moving at the top of the rise 4 legs. A long tail. Something spiked. A manticore. And it's smiling. The slope is loose underfoot. Every step, a slide. Red dust clings to your ankles. Coats your tongue. Scratches your throat like you've been inhaling powdered brick. The sky has dimmed to that strange in-between hue sunset, if the sun were bleeding. And there, standing at the top of the ridge like a sentient gargoyle with confidence issues, is the manticore. You stop. You don't speak. You've met enough monsters by now to know when silence is the best offer on the table. The manticore watches you with small, unsettling eyes. They're too close together. Too human. Which wouldn't be so bad if the rest of him wasn't a lion's body. A scorpion's tail. And a mouth full of triple rows of teeth. Yes. Like a shark. A land shark. With opinions and a poison tail. According to Persian legend, the origin of this particular walking hazard, the manticore could shoot its tail spikes like arrows and devour a human whole without leaving a trace. That's right. No bones. No clothes. Not even a sandal buckle. Just poof. You're a snack and a secret. Greeks adopted the myth later. Possibly after a game of cultural telephone, adding new layers of monstrosity as the centuries rolled on. Historians still debate whether the creature was based on garbled reports of exotic animals or an elaborate metaphor for human predation. Either way, this one doesn't blink. He paces a little at the ridge. Tail, arched up like a question mark, with toxic punctuation. Every step is deliberate. Claws, clicking on stone. You're downwind. And unfortunately, he smells like raw meat left in the sun. You inch sideways. As if that will help. It won't. He flicks his tail. A spike thuds into the ground, where your foot had been a second ago. Okay. Message received. You dart left. Sliding through gravel. Knee bent low. Arms swinging instinctively to balance. The manticore doesn't charge. Waits. Letting you scramble. Knowing full well how few exits there are in this landscape. You duck behind a boulder. Another spike slams into the stone above your head, embedding with a thunk that vibrates all the way into your molars. You keep moving. Not fast. Not directly away. You zig. You zag. You dive into a narrow cleft in the ridge wall and wait. Silence. He doesn't follow. The manticore growls, the sound more like a laugh caught in a meat grinder, then turns and vanishes over the ridge, like you were a game, not a meal, not even a challenge. Somehow, that's worse. You rest there, heart doing the samba against your ribs, until the shadows deepen and the stars, those weird, flickering underworld stars, glimmer through the haze. You're still whole, barely, when you finally climb out of your hiding place. The ridge has changed. It's cooler now. And, to the east, lies a grove of twisted olive trees, their trunks braided with vines that whisper in a language you almost understand. Beyond that grove is a garden, circular and oddly perfect. In its center, a golden apple tree, and curled around its roots, glittering like liquid bronze, is a dragon. Well, a drakon, to be precise. Not the fire-breathing, winged reptile of modern tales. The Greek version is long, serpentine, wingless, on scent, more snake than lizard, more god than beast. This one slumbers quietly, coils shimmering in the moonlight, and each slow breath displaces petals like ripples in time. According to myth, this is likely Ladon, the guardian of the Garden of the Hesperides, tasked with guarding the golden apples, those same apples that eventually get stolen by Heracles as part of his 12 labors. Of course, Ladon didn't exactly get thanked for his trouble. Some say he was slain. Others insist he still sleeps there, coiled in eternity, dreaming the weight of the world's last unpicked fruit. Historians still argue whether the garden represents a real-world location, maybe in North Africa, maybe the edge of the known worlder. If it's just a gleaming stand-in for paradise denied. One thing's clear, the drakon was never the villain, just the guardian. The price of entry, the test. You step closer, not to steal, just to see. The scent of the grove is sweet jasmine, myrrh, something older, like honey warmed by sunlight that doesn't exist anymore. The tree pulses with golden light, and for one reckless second, you wonder if the apples would be warm to the touch. You don't find out. Ladon's eyes flick open-slitted, answent, knowing. You freeze. He watches, doesn't move, and then closes them again. You retreat, quietly. There's a rustling behind you. Something metallic, something slow. You turn and see a shape approaching from the path ahead. Giant, gleaming, humanoid. Its joints grind as it moves, like stone dragged across stone. Its skin is bronze. Its face is blank. It's not breathing, because it's Talos, a walking automaton, a robot. In a Greek myth, Talos was forged by Hephaestus, or possibly gifted by Zeus, depending on who's telling the story, and tasked with guarding the island of Crete. He ran laps around the island 3 times a day and hurled boulders at incoming ships. Not bad cardio for someone filled with molten ichor instead of blood. And he's walking your way now. Talos does not run. He doesn't have to. His massive bronze frame glides forward like a statue possessed by a grudge. Each step sends tremors through the stone path, and you swear you can feel the vibrations in your teeth. His head turns no eyes, just slits where sight probably happens, and you know with painful certainty, he sees you. Maybe not as a threat. Maybe not even as a person. Just a blip. An anomaly in his otherwise endless patrol. You back away slowly, calculating how far you are from the nearest cover, and whether any of it will matter when a 2-story metal guardian with an internal furnace decides you're a problem. Talos raises an arm. Not fast, not threatening, just acknowledging. You freeze. His hand lowers again. Maybe you're beneath his parameters. Maybe you're not on the crush list today. You don't question it. You move. According to ancient sources, Talos had a single vein that ran from his neck to his ankle, closed off with a bronze nail. A mechanical being. Yes, but also bizarrely biological. Some say he was created by Hephaestus, god of blacksmiths, and gifted to Europa by Zeus as a sentry. Others believe he was a remnant from a more ancient civilization evidence, maybe, of early automata in Greek thought. Historians still argue whether Talos is a metaphor for law, for surveillance, or for technology outpacing humanity's ability to understand it. Regardless, he's impressive and terrifying. You creep through the edge of the valley as Talos begins another lap, his giant bronze feet kicking up small storms of dust. You wonder if he ever tires, if his joints ache, if he ever just stops. But you suspect he doesn't. He's just one long loop, forged to defend, never to reflect. The landscape smooths again. For the first time in a while, the path is clear and quiet. Too quiet. No hissing. No growling. No riddles. No flaming breath. Just wind. And the sound of your own footsteps. Then you hear something faint lowing. Distant, but distinct. You know that sound. Cattle. You crest a hill and stare across a plain baked in golden haze. There, scattered across the field, graze some of the most unimpressed cows you've ever seen. Red-coated, slow chewing, immune to drama. Near them stands a figurer, rather. 3 of them merged at the waist, arms folded, glaring across the landscape like he's waiting for someone to mess up. Geryon, triple-bodied, triple-headed, triple the trouble. According to the myth, Heracles had to steal these very cattle as one of his labors, crossing continents to do so. But Geryon? He wasn't just a guy with a really bad duplication glitch. He was a warrior king of the western edge of the world, with a venomous watchdog and a fondness for guarding things that don't want to be guarded. The ancient Greeks loved a logistical nightmare, and this guy was the final boss of spatial confusion. 3 torsos, 3 heads, 1 belt. Somehow, it says you. Well, all 3 of him do. One raises an eyebrow. Another one sneezes. The third squints at you like he's solving a math problem he doesn't like. You hold up your hands, palms open, and walk a slow arc around the herd. Heart hammering, trying not to step in anything sacred or make sudden movements near divine livestock. According to some fringe versions of the myth, Geryon wasn't hostile at all, just really tired of people trying to steal his cows. Can you blame him? If every passing demigod treated your prized herd like a checkout item, you'd probably get cranky too. Historians still debate whether his triple body design was a symbol of power, a poetic exaggeration, or just the result of some scribe thinking, "You know what this guy needs? More arms?" Oh, you skirt the herd. Stepping over low fences and ancient stones, one of the cows moos directly at you. You moo back, out of politeness. It blinks, then loses interest. Geryon does not move. But all three heads track your progress with the same expression, mild annoyance. Like a teacher who's seen this mistake before. You're almost clear of the pasture when the ground shifts again, this time, not upward or inward, but downward. A cave entrance opens in the hillside ahead, jagged and pulsing, with a faint, rhythmic rumble. It smells of salt, of pressure, of things hidden under miles of crushing water. You step into the darkness and descend toward the sea. Down here, the world forgets how to echo. The tunnel narrows, then widens again into a chamber with walls that shimmer with faint bioluminescence. Water drips from the ceiling in a slow, patient rhythm. The floor is damp, gritty with sand, and from the far end of the chamber, something moves. You've entered the realm of Phorcys and Ceto, the primordial sea gods and proud parents of many a monstrosity. You can't see them, not fully, but you feel them. The water trembles underfoot. A massive eye opens in the wall. A fin slides past, longer than a ship. From the ceiling, translucent, tendrils drift like underwater ivy, pulsing with slow light. These weren't gods in the usual Sensino temples. No prayers. Just old things. Wild things. Phorcys with his crab-claw limbs and spiked scales. Ceto with her long, coiling body and a crown of barnacles. Their children? The Gorgons. The Graeae. Even Echidna. Depending on who's telling it. You're in the origin story now. The DNA of dread. Historians still argue whether these figures represent chaos itself or the sea's untamable vastness. Either way, they're not looking at you. Yet. You edge through the shallows and back toward light. Your feet find dry stone again. Behind you, something size-cements. Ancient. And strangely content, you've met the monsters beneath the sea. But soon, you'll have to face the ones that are barely monsters at all. You emerge from the dripping stone passage, blinking into dry air once more. The sea is behind you. No, it's myths. It's monsters. It's immensity. Ahead, the ground levels into a strange plateau, dusted with pale ash. The sky is a dim slate, not quite day or night, and the wind hums softly like it's trying not to wake something. The stillness here feels curated, intentional, and then you see Ita hulking shape sprawled across the gravel, legs tangled like discarded lumber, arms too many, heads too much. The hecatoncheires, yes. The 100-handed ones. Giants from the very earliest myths. Older than Zeus. Older than Olympus. Maybe older than reason itself. They were said to have 50 heads and 100 arms each along, with the delightful ability to hurl 100 rocks at once. Imagine a panic attack with biceps. You step closer. Slowly. The creature before you is not exactly sleeping, but not fully awake either. Its limbs twitch occasionally, like someone dreaming of a brawl. Its face is more like masks than true. Heads rotate softly on unseen axes. each mouthing something different. Laughter, whispers, screams, nursery rhymes. One of them might be singing. According to Hesiod, the Hecaton shares were children of Gaia and Uranus, locked away by their father for being a little too extra. Later, freed by Zeus to help in the war against the Titans. They hurled mountains. They became sieges in motion. And when the war ended, they were shoved into Tartarus, again rewarded with an eternal role as jailers of other monsters. You know, a very Greek version of "thank you for your service." Historians still argue whether these beings represented the chaotic power of nature, or if they were symbolic of early fears around multi-limbed disease, excess, or even early machinery. Either way, they are not peaceful. You move carefully, tracing a wide arc around the creature's mass. One of its hands opens mid-air, fingers long and impossibly thin, flexing like it's trying to remember how they work. Another hand grips the dirt and squeezes until it turns to gravel. One eye rolls in your direction. Just one. You don't wait for more. You cross the plateau and find yourself climbing again, this time into terrain that feels drier. Older, cracked like skin, left too long in the sun. The wind returns, carrying salt and dust and something else. A faint hint of brine and decay. You're heading back toward water, but not like before. This is deeper, colder. The ocean, as womb, as tomb, as myth. The trail descends into a cavern that smells like a fish market, if the fish were still trying to bite. At its base, bioluminescent pools glow with eerie green, lighting a massive mural carved into the stone. Two massive figures are etched, their Phorcys and Ceto again, but this time surrounded by a sea of offspring. Not metaphorical children, literal ones. And some of them you recognize. The Gorgons, the Grei, Ladon, and deeper in the carving, smaller, weirder shapes. Ones you haven't seen yet. A flicker in the pool's reflection catches your eye. You're not alone. The water swells upward, not violently, but deliberately, and from its surface rises a form that is neither fish nor woman, neither beast nor deity. It pulses with color-shifting scales, fins that look like silk, torn in slow motion, and dozens of eyes, each one blinking independently. It doesn't speak. It just watches. This, perhaps, is one of the forgotten spawn, a fragment of ancient ocean memory made flesh. You bow slightly, unsure why. The creature responds with a slow blink, 7 eyes closing. 3, staying open. It sinks back into the water. You don't follow. You climb. The cavern spits you back out onto dry stone once more. The air feels warmer, like you've returned to something that pretends to be familiar. The sky overhead has turned lavender, the kind of color that makes you wonder if anything is real, or if you've just dreamt a semester's worth of Greek mythology. But no, your legs ash. Your throat is dry. You smell like salt, bronze, smoke, and fear. This has all been very real. Ahead, the path grows narrow. You spot a boundarian edge where the underworld's atmosphere seems to lose interest. Beyond it lies a rocky plain, scattered with dry bones and stone columns that lean like drunk philosophers. It feels like the end, not of the world, just the journey. You step forward. But something follows. Not footsteps. Not howls. Just breathe. Warm. Familiar. You turn. Nothing there. Of course there's nothing. That's the trick. You've seen monsters born of rage, of revenge, of bad parenting, and worse curses. But some monsters, some you carry. Not all of them have names. Not all of them hiss. Some just wait. Quietly. You press forward. One more plane to cross. And then, who knows? Maybe the monsters fade. Maybe they don't. But you've made it this far. And that counts. That has to count. The plane stretches ahead, like a memory, refusing to end. Flat. Cracked. Indifferent. The wind picks up again, but not strong just enough to shift the dust in small, repetitive patterns, as if even the earth is trying to stay busy. You walk because there's nothing else to do. The horizon doesn't change. But the silence does. It deepens, thickens, starts to listen. You pass another column, this one, etched with names. Most of them worn away. A few are still visible. Some you recognize. Others feel eerily familiar, though you've never seen them before. You try not to look too long. Then something moves. It's not a roar or a shriek. It's subtle like a ripple under fabric. The ground ahead stirs. A low rise appears where there was nothing before. And slowly, with a grace that doesn't match, the dread curling up your spine, she steps into view. The figure before you isn't grotesque. In fact, she's striking, regal, not beautiful. Exactly more like a statue that was never meant to smile. Her robe flutters in the wind that no longer touches you. Her feet make no sound. Her eyes are pale, almost opalescent, and they reflect nothing. This is Mormo. Or maybe Lamia again. Or maybe something even older. She doesn't speak. She doesn't need to. Her presence is an accusation. Not loud, just steady. She carries no weapons. Yet every part of you recognizes her as a predator. Not of flesh, of certainty. In some fragments of myth, Mormo is a bogey woman used by Greek nurses to scare children into obedience. In others, she's a companion of Hecate, a devourer of misbehaving souls, a mother driven mad by loss, a monster who watches from the corners of your sleep. Her name became a whisper of threat. Behave. Or Mormo will get you. Historians still argue whether she was a misunderstood underworld spirit or an amalgamation of cultural anxieties sewn together into a single mythic face. She takes a step toward you. Your breath shortens. Not from fear but from recognition. She doesn't shapeshift like Medusa. She doesn't growl or hiss. She mirrors. She reflects everything you'd rather not face. You remember a mistake, a betrayal, a version of yourself you tried to forget. And there it is, flickering in her expression, just for a moment, just long enough, you blink. She's gone. Just like that, the plane resumes its quiet hum. You keep walking, though your legs feel heavier, like each step has to carry more than just your weight. The terrain shifts again, subtle at first. Stones become bones. Not the human kind. Too big. Too twisted. Vertebrae that spiral like ram's horns. Ribs that cage nothing. Skulls with more eyes than sense. You're in the graveyard of forgotten monsters. There's no path here. Just remains. Some partially buried. Others arranged like they simply sat down one day and waited to be unmade. You step over a collapsed spine. One end, still steaming faintly. Time behaves differently here. It doesn't pass. It just rests. You stop beside a skull as tall as a cart. A chunk of it's missing. Cleanly sliced. Beside it sits a weapon. Rusted and overgrown with thorny vines. You don't touch it. There's something comforting about the silence. Like these monsters got tired. 2. Not defeated. Not destroyed. Just retired. Their stories unwound. Their names forgotten. Their nightmares outdated. Replaced by newer fears. Faster fears. Sleeker ones with better special effects. You wonder which of today's monsters will one day lie here. Silent and misunderstood. And then, from the far edge of the graveyard, a soft sound. Flute music. Faint. Melancholic. Completely out of place. You follow it. Because how could you not? Beyond the last ridge, a thin column of smoke rises. A campfire. A figure sits beside it. Hunched over. Playing a reed flute. The melody winds through the dusk like a lullaby wrapped in cobwebs. You draw closer. He's not a monster. Not entirely. Hooved feet. Curved horns. A goat-like tail flicking behind him. A satyrer. Maybe just Pan on a quiet night off. He stops playing as you approach and gestures to the opposite log. You sit. The fire crackles politely. He doesn't speak. But he hands you a flask. You sip. It's warm. Spiced. Calming. He tilts his head and smiles like someone who's seen it all and decided not to interfere. Fringe fact. In some late myths, Pan wasn't just a rustic fertility god. He was fear incarnate's name, the root of panic. He could cause armies to flee in terror with a single shout. But here, there's no shouting. Just quiet music. A little rest. He hands you a small piece of parchment. On it, a sketch. A map. Maybe. Or just a doodle of something monstrous with a note underneath that reads, "They used to be afraid of this." You chuckle. He grins. Then he vanishes. Not disappear. Just isn't there anymore. The fire dies. The flask is empty, but your legs are lighter. You rise and walk, and somewhere ahead, something stirs. Something final. Not bigger, just older. The world narrows now. The wide-open graveyard of bones and old memories gives way to a path of tightly pressed stone. A canyon where the walls lean in, and the sky above shrinks to a ribbon of twilight. You feel taller here. Not because you are, but because everything else is trying to make you feel smaller. And it's working. You move forward. Your footfalls echoing against the smooth rock. Each step returned to you a second later, like someone's following, just a beat behind. You don't look back. You're not that curious. Not anymore. Ahead. The canyon opens not wide. just enough to frame something very, very wrong. At first, it looks like a temple, but the angles are off. The columns lean in unnatural directions. The stone itself seems to shimmer not with light, but with unease. Your brain tries to correct it and fails. In the center of the structure is a pit. Not deep, just black. Light goes in, doesn't come out. Beside it stands a pair of women, ancient and blind, draped in cloaks, the color of wet ash. They don't look up as you approach. You've met the Grey-Eye, 3 sisters, but only 2 are present now. The third sits farther off, holding something small in her hand, a glass eye. You feel it watching you, even when it's not being worn. In myth, they shared 1 eye and 1 tooth between them because the ancient Greeks did not believe in splitting a dental plan evenly. These weren't monsters in the usual sense, more like oracles who never got the memo to retire. In Perseus' tale, he stole their shared eye to force them to reveal the location of Medusa. You're not here to steal anything. You're just passing through. One of the sisters reaches out a hand. Blindly, you take it. She nods, like you've passed a test you didn't study for. Then, she places the eye in your hand. Not to keep, just to borrow. The world shifts. You blink and, suddenly, you're not in the canyon anymore. You're on a hill. Wind rushes around you, and the stars above are wrong too bright. Too close. You feel them looking back. The land is barren, but pulsing. Everything here is alive, but barely. Before you, a figure rises from the ground. Long robes trail behind it. The wind doesn't move them. It doesn't breathe. It doesn't need to. This is something that was never alive and never will be. Something invented to be feared. You've reached the mythic boundary, the edge where monsters become ideas. The creature has no name you recognize, no face. It flickers, shifting shape, becoming Medusa, then the Hydra, then Scylla, then you, then nothing at all. It is the shadow of fear, the one that wraps around all others. And still, you stand, you hold the eye out. The creature tilts, then recoils, not in pain, not in anger, just resistance. It doesn't like being seen. That's its weakness. That's the trick. Monsters thrive in shadow. Names pin them down. Stories cut them open. You return the eye to the waiting hand behind you. The world blinks again. Back in the canyon, the Grey-Eye smile not warmly, but with a kind of exhausted approval. You leave them without speaking. The path leads upward now, spiraling around a peak, so tall it disappears into low clouds. The climb burns your legs. Your breath comes thin. You've walked through swamps and mazes, dodged fire and riddles, stared down gods and beasts and yourself. This last ascent feels less like escape and more like graduation. At the summit, the world opens. You're standing on a wide plateau. The clouds part. Moonlight spills over crumbling ruins. This was once a temple. 2. Now it's just foundation stones and broken statuary. Their faces chipped away by time or intention. You sit on the largest block and close your eyes. There are no monsters here. But there were. You remember them. Cerberus, with his bone-crunching jaws and sad, loyal eyes. Medusa, her sorrow folded behind her fury. The Hydra, all heads and no sense of closure. Scylla and Charybdis, twin terrors of tide and teeth. Typhone, the tantrum of the earth. Echidna and her brood, the Minotaur's lonely rage. The quiet Gorgons, harpies in flight. The Chimera's hiss. The stalking smile of the Manticore. The cold rhythm of Talos. Gerion's threefold scowl. Ladon guarding golden frout. The Hecatoncheir's restless dreams. The Grey's quiet judgment. You didn't slay them. You met them, survived them, named them. Some still linger at the edges of your thoughts, curled up in shadow, waiting, but most have quieted, not gone, just seen. The wind rises, the stars blink. You stretch your legs and begin the descent. There's one last story to follow. You start the descent slowly. The slope covered in loose shale and silence. Your footsteps send little avalanches trickling down behind you, tiny reminders that gravity, unlike most monsters you've met, is consistent. The air here is thin but gentle, like the underworld itself is exhaling. There's a calmness, but it's the uneasy kind. The kind that comes before you remember something you tried very hard to forget. The path curves into a ravine, and the walls close in again, carved, smooth, not by wind, but by something heavier. You can see claw marks, not scratches, not frenzied slashes, but slow, deliberate carvings. A groove here, a spiral there. These were not made in a hurry. Something lived here, something thoughtful. At the end of the ravine is a cave, naturally, but this one isn't dark. It glows faintly from within, like the light from a lantern left burning too long. You step closer, the warmth brushing your skin like steam. Inside, the walls pulse with amber light, illuminating a mural that wraps the entire chamber. And it's not of gods or heroes. It's monsters, dozens, maybe hundreds, all painted with surprising tenderness. A harpy mid-laugh, Cerberus curled into sleep, the Chimera nuzzling a tree like a cat, the Minotaur with his head bowed, cradling something in his arms. You realize, slowly, that the mural isn't about fear. It's about memory. And sitting in the center of the chamber, cross-legged and still, is an old man, long beard, empty eyes, a pen in one hand, a bowl of ochre paint in the other. He doesn't look up when you enter. He's painting the final figure on the wall. It's you. You freeze. He says nothing, just dips the brush again. His fingers are stained, his expression calm. You take a step closer. Who are you? He finally speaks. Voice, soft as parchment. No one. I just record what's left behind. You look at the wall. Your likeness is rough, unfinished. Around it are shapes you remember. The Hydra's heads, the Sphinx's tail, Imposa's long smile. They orbit your image like constellations. You sit beside him. Why? You ask. He doesn't answer right away, just paints a bit more. Then, finally, Because monsters don't vanish. They fade. And someone needs to remember their shapes. Oh. You look down. The floor is etched. 2 names. Some you've heard in myth. Some you haven't. Most are scratched over. Rewritten. Corrected. The stories, it seems, keep changing. Historians still argue whether Greek monsters were ever meant to be villains. Many served as symbols, boundaries, tests, warnings. Some were metaphors for forces of nature. Others were human fears wrapped in scales or feathers. But this man, whoever he is, seems less interested in answers and more in preservation. You help him finish your outline. It doesn't feel like an honor. Or a curse. Just an ending. You rise. And the man doesn't stop you. You leave the cave. And the light behind you dims until it disappears. Outside. The path splits again, one trail, climbing gently toward pale hills. The other slipping into low fog and sharp rocks. You choose neither. You sit. There's a stillness here, but not the kind that presses down. The kind that floats. You lay back, watching the sky, stars, or something like stars, blink lazily above. You let your eyes drift closed. But the underworld is never entirely done. A whisper crawls across the grass. A rustle in the low scrub. You sit up and see. Phobos. He's not listed among the monsters, not usually. He's a god. Sort of. The son of Ares and Aphrodite. And the personification of fear itself. His name gives us phobia. And he looks ordinary. No claws. No teeth. Just a lean young man with eyes like oil on water. He doesn't approach. Just stands at a distance. Arms crossed. You know why he's here. Because now that you've met the monsters, survived them, seen their truths, you're still left with him, the root of it all. Fear, he shrugs, as if to say, you've seen worse, and he's not wrong. You don't run, he smiles, faintly, then fades into the dark. The wind picks up again, and you realize the underworld doesn't want to keep you anymore. Not because you've conquered anything, but because you've learned the one truth monsters never expect you to know. You can walk beside them. You stand, brushing the dust from your knees, and turn toward the path that wasn't there before. It curls gently upward. A soft incline, bordered by low stones and flickering torchlight, no source. Just flames, hanging in the air like polite fireflies with boundary issues. The walk is easier now. Your feet, though sore, find the ground more forgiving. The landscape hums low with memory, as if the very dust recalls your steps before you take them. You pass under a stone arch that crumbles a little as you go. Time isn't sturdy here, but it's forgiving. The breeze carries distant laughter. Not cruel, not mocking, just a soft echo of something once joyful. You follow it. The trail opens onto a circular platform lined with broken statues. Each one is different. One wears a lion's head. Another has wings like a moth. One has hooves. Another tusks. One is clearly a harpy in mid-squawk. All half-finished. All beautiful. In that way, unfinished things are when you can still see the choices not made. In the center is a pedestal. On it sits an object so ordinary it almost surprises you. A mirror. Cracked. Yes, but still reflective. You step closer, unsure what you expect to see. A survivor? A mess? A mosaic of every monster you've passed? What stares back is just you, tired, dirty, alive. The cracked surface fractures your reflection into segments sewn eye here, part of a cheek there, your mouth twice, smiling in one fragment and flat in another. But none of it is monstrous. That's the trick. Monsters aren't always in the mirror. Sometimes they're behind you. Sometimes they're following. Sometimes they're inside the people who smile too easily or make rules they don't follow. And sometimes they're just misunderstood. Figures painted in black ink by poets with grudges and too much wine. You pick up the mirror. It's heavier than it looks. Warm from the pedestal, you carry it with you. As you exit the platform, the statues seem to nod in your peripheral vision. Not a trick. Just acknowledgement. Ahead. The path turns downhill again and into a forest. Not quite alive, but not dead either. Trees sway, even without wind. Leaves fall upward. You keep walking. Soon, the air thickens with the smell of wet stone and cold iron. You're near the edge of Hades again. The boundary between myth and memory. Between story and silence. You hear hooves not galloping. Not panicked. Steady. Measured. You pose. From the shadows emerges a centaur, not the wild reveler type. This one wears a cloak, carries scrolls at his side, and eyes like someone who grades harshly but fairly. Chiron, you recognize him from the stories, the wise one, the tutor of heroes, the creature who refused to be a beast, who taught Achilles and Asclepius and Hercules, who gave his immortality away just to escape his pain. He sees the mirror in your hand and nods once. Not approval. Not pity. Just recognition. You've gone farther than most. He says. Voice, low and steady. Farther than most want to. You don't reply. You don't need to. You still have one more. He says. You frown. One more monster, you ask? He shakes his head. One more truth. He gestures toward the trees, and a narrow gap opens between the trunks. A doorway. A passage. Go. He says. You'll know it when you see it. Oh. You walk through and emerge into a garden. Not a mythical one. Not golden apples. Not cursed groves. Just a garden. Simple. Humble. A bench. A small fountain. Bees. The sound of leaves moving. And in the center, tending to a bed of herbs with her sleeves rolled up, is a woman, middle-aged, smiling. Ordinary, except her shadow flickers differently. Like it remembers wings, she stands and looks up as you approach. You've never seen her before, but you know her. She's every monster that wasn't called one. Every woman labeled witch because she said no. Every creature rewritten by someone else's fear, Every version of a villain who was just trying to survive. "Sit," she says. You do. She hands you a cup of water. It's warm. Tastes like mint and stone and time. "I used to be a dragon," she says with a shrug. "Once." "Oh," you nod. "That tracks. We all were. At some point," she says, gesturing to the herbs. "Before we got tired. Before we were rewritten." "Oh so, you sip again." "Do they still tell your story?" you ask. "Sometimes." She smiles. "They get it wrong. But sometimes they're close." "So." You sit in silence for a long while. When you stand, she hugs you. No wings. No fire. Just warmth. You walk back through the trees. The centaur is gone. The path ahead glows faintly now. You're near the end. Not the end of stories. Just this one. You follow the last glowing path. And it winds like memory, sometimes looping. Sometimes doubling back. But always leading somewhere. The air is warmer now. Not stifling, but calm. Like the moment right before sleep, where the edges of thought start to blur. You're deep in the underworld still. But it no longer feels hostile. It just feels old. Settled. Like everything dangerous has already happened. And the world is finally exhaling. The landscape flattens into a wide field, blanketed in asphodel, flower of the dead. Not dramatic like poppies. Not bright. Just pale. And still. And endless. You walk through it quietly. The petals. Brushing your fingertips. There are no footprints. The field resets with every step. Like it doesn't want to keep a record of you. You can respect that. You spot figures in the distance. Dozens. Hundreds. Silent. Not ghostly. Not monstrous. Just people. Some sit. Some walk in slow. Unhurried circles. Some hum. Though you can't make out the tune. You recognize none of them. But they don't seem surprised to see you. This is Elysium. Or a version of it. The mythological resting place for the heroic, the pure, the poetically convenient, and yet, it's not perfect. No feasts. No music. Just peace. Plain and unmarketable. You wander among them for a while. No one speaks. But their silence isn't cold. It's the kind of quiet that says, you're not the first here. You won't be the last. At the far edge of the field is a low hill, and atop it stands a single olive tree. You walk to it, and beneath its branches, find an altar simple, made of rough stone, etched with names, the same kind you saw in the mural back in the painter's cave. Some are scratched out, some are repeated. One is yours. You blink. It's not dramatic, not glowing, not carved in gold. Just there. You don't remember writing it, but you know it's true. In that moment, you realize something you've been circling the entire journey. Monsters aren't born. They're remembered, and remembered wrong. Take Medusa, for instance. Turned to stone by her own gazier, turned into a shield by someone else's story. Or Typhone, who fought Olympus not out of rage, but loyalty to an older order. Or the Harpies, who were storm spirits, before they became a punchline. Even the Minotaur, locked in a labyrinth for crimes he didn't commit, painted as rage, when he was really just lost. You sit beneath the olive tree and look out at the field. You don't see monsters anymore. You see metaphors. You see misunderstandings. You see the literary equivalent of, "It's complicated." Oh. You take the cracked mirror from your satchel and place it on the altar. For someone else to find. Someone who'll need it. The wind shifts again. You rise. The path back is visible now, lined with lanterns that weren't there before. As you walk, you pass through a gate made of shadow and smoke. And on the other side, torchlight, familiar air, the scent of soil, of cold stone, to of fresh air returning to places it was shut out of. You've reached the edge of the underworld. The monsters aren't chasing, not anymore. Because they've been seen, they've been heard, and some of them, just a few wave, been understood, a final fringe detail. In some obscure texts, there's a line that claims, "Those who walk with monsters carry stories back to the world above." Historians still debate whether that was literal, metaphorical, or just another scribbled margin note by a bored monk. You don't care. You walk. And the dark behind you breathes once, then sleeps. The ground under your feet begins to feel firmer with every stepless dreamlike. Less myth, soaked. It's not quite the world above, but it's something between, a middle place, a landing zone for thoughts that haven't quite formed yet. The kind of place where you might wake up remembering only the feeling of what you dreamt, but not the face, not the shape, just the chill, just the breath. You follow a trail of firefly-like glimmers, each flickering a different shade, some blue, some gold. One, a faint, anxious green. They don't lead you now so much as accompany you, floating just ahead like friends who know the way but aren't in a rush to get there. The air is quiet again, but not hollow. It's thick with meaning, like a page you haven't read yet. As you crest a final low ridge, you find yourself looking down into a small valley. In its center, a stone circle, half buried, ancient. You know instinctively, this is the last stop. Not because of a grand finale. Not because something enormous waits here, but because nothing does. Nothing except you. You step into the circle. The glimmers fade. The wind pauses. Respectfully. And then, like smoke unfurling in reverse, you begin to see them, not in flesh, not even as ghosts, but as impressions. Acechos, Cerberus at the gate, still sniffing around, occasionally growling at things no one else hears. Medusa in her ruined temple, quiet and awake, surrounded by things turned to stone by more than just her gaze. Scylla and Charybdis, still fighting their endless war of proximity, doomed to never switch places. Typhone, brooding beneath his mountain, the sky still tasting his name in thunder. The Minotaur in his labyrinth, pacing his spirals in rhythms only he understands. And on. And on. They don't look at you. But you look at them, and you see it now. They were never waiting for heroes. They were waiting for witnesses. People who wouldn't fight or flee, but stay, learn, name things correctly. The stories didn't lie. But they edited, as stories do, as humans do. You sit in the circle, cross-legged, comfortable, almost, and for a few long moments, there is nothing but the sound of your breath and the feeling of ground under your palms. Then, footsteps, one set, soft. A child steps into the circle with you, no one you recognize. But they sit beside you, wide-eyed, waiting, and you understand. It's your turn to tell the stories now, not as warnings, not as weapons, but as memories. You speak of Medusa not as a curse, but as a boundary no one asked her to hold. You speak of Echidna not as a monster mom, but as someone who had to raise horrors without instructions. You speak of Lamia, whose lullaby never stopped playing. You speak of the monsters you met that didn't try to hurt you, only to be understood. The child listens. And behind them, more shadows gather children, strangers, shapes without edges, all of them ready to hear. And so, for the first time, you tell the whole thing aloud. Not the hero's version, yours. Because the scariest part of monsters is often not their claws or teeth or fire, but the silence that follows their names. You fill that silence now. With story, with truth. With the kind of remembering that leaves room for softness. The sky lightens not with dawn, but with understanding. You rise, and the circle lets you go. You walk again now, not through a myth or a nightmare, but through memory, through the kind of place that feels realer for having been imagined. You hear birds. Distant. Familiar. The ground feels like dirt again. Not symbolism. Your arms are your own. So is your name. You don't look back. You don't need to. They're not behind you anymore. They're part of you now. The world resolves around you like fog pulled gently from a window. The path underfoot is real now-packed earth. Scattered pebbles. The occasional stubborn weed poking through. No fire. No bonus. No winged silhouettes waiting in the trees. Just the ordinary miracle of solid ground. And yet, something's changed. The air isn't just quieted. Listens differently. Like it knows where you've been. You walk with steady steps. Not toward anything in particular, but through something the long after of the journey. The kind of walk you take when the danger is past but your thoughts haven't caught up. Somewhere behind you, the monsters rest. Somewhere ahead of you, the stories wait to be told. But right now, it's just you. And that is enough. The trees here are ordinary. Olive, cypress, poplar. No writhing vines. No whispering leaves. Birds perch on branches and stay there. A fox darts across the trail ahead of you and disappears into underbrush without making a speech. You realize, with a tiny laugh, how quiet the real world is, once you stop looking for metaphors in every shadow, and yet, you keep thinking in monster terms. That twisted root looks a bit like a serpent's tail. The call of that owl almost sounds like a harpy's screech. The shape of your own shadow still feels larger than it should be, but you know better now. Those aren't threats. They're echoes, and echoes don't bite. You pass a ruined column, half sunk into the ground. carved with names too weathered to read. You run your fingers across the stone. It doesn't respond. But it also doesn't feel cold. Like it's waiting. Perhaps. To be remembered. Further on. A figure leans against a tree. It's not a god. Not a monster. Not a spirit. Just a man. Thin. Tall. Eyes like thunderclouds, trying to decide if they want to rain. He nods at you. You stop, he says. You went all the way down? Didn't you? You nod back. He pushes off the tree, straightens his tunic, and says, most people don't make it out. Azure. You look him over. It doesn't carry weapons. He doesn't glow, but he does seem slightly blurred. Like someone caught between chapters. You one of the old ones? You ask. He shrugs. Something like that. You walk together for a bit, not speaking. Then, out of nowhere, he says, did any of them look like you? You think about that? A long moment. Yes? You say, some did. Oh, he nods. Unsurprised. It's always like that. Hummeh. He stops walking, points down the path. That way takes you back. You don't ask to where. You already know. The waking world. The ordinary one. The one with to-do lists and laundry and names that aren't always mythic. But before you go, he asks, what did you learn? You pose. There's too much. But only one thing feels true enough to say, they're not what the story said. He smiles at that. Neither are you. Oh, then he vanishes. No swirl of mist. No magical sound cue. Just gone. You're alone again, but you don't feel lonely. The path ahead is short now. Familiar. You walk it like you've done it before. Maybe you have. Maybe we all do. In dreams, we forget before the toast pops up. At the trail's end, a small gate appears. Wooden. Unlocked. You push it open and step through, and there it is. The world. Not grand. Not glowing. Just real. A field. A breeze. The smell of dry grass. The sound of leaves tapping together. You're back. Not unchanged. Not monstrous. Just more complete. You glance behind you. But the gate is already gone. Nothing but trees now. You breathe in. And for the first time, realize how heavy the underworld had been. You exhale. You're still carrying them all the monsters, but they don't weigh you down. They walk with you now. Quiet. Unseen, not as curses. But as companions, you keep walking, though you no longer know where the path leads. And it doesn't really matter. The world around you feels quiet or not, the haunted hush of the underworld. But the simple quiet of a world between things, a morning before birds start to sing, a moment before thoughts become words, the kind of quiet you can carry up ahead. A river cuts through the field narrow, shallow, lazily moving over stones that look suspiciously like they've heard stories before. You crouch. Dip your fingers into the water. It's cold, but not sharp. It feels like clarity. like rinsing off more than dirt. You cup your hands and splash your face. The water clings to your skin like memory. And for a heartbeat, everything you've seen comes back. Cerberus, Medusa, the Hydra, Scylla and Charybdis, Typhon, Lamia, Ladon, Talos, the child with the wide eyes, the man who asked you what you learned, the woman who once was a dragon. Smiling over a garden, she chose to stay in. You remember them all, and then the river lets you go. You stand and continue, water drying on your face, like something sacred you didn't mean to bless yourself with. The grass sways around your legs. The sun is rising now, and you notice it not because of the light, but because the shadows finally look like they belong to you again. Just yours. Eventually, you reach a tree. No monster here. No metaphor. Just a tree. Wide branches. Thick trunk. Soft shade. The kind of place anyone might sit to think. And you do. You sit. You lean back. You rest, because now, there's nothing left to run from. Not every story needs a clean ending. Some just taper into truth. And your truth? You went into the depths. You faced them. You didn't win. You didn't lose. You learned. That monsters are teachers dressed in fear. That sometimes we only become whole by touching what scares us. That darkness is not the opposite of light. It's the cradle of it. You tilt your head back. The sky looks softer now. The colors less threatening. And somewhere, far away, but also somewhere deep inside, you can still hear the echo of footsteps, of wings, of hooves, of the hiss of scales and the scrape of claws. They're not chasing. They're following, not to harm, but to remind, you're the one who walked among them. You're the one who didn't flinch. You're the one who came back. You close your eyes and let sleep find you. Word count, 1. 134. Wind down, 300 words. The monsters have gone quiet now. Not vanished, never vanished, but gentler. Smaller. They settle back into the corners of thought, into the soft folds of myth and memory, waiting for someone else to be curious enough, brave enough, tired enough to visit them. But not tonight. Tonight, you've done more than most. You walked through fear without needing to fight it. You listened to stories that were once sharp, and you softened them. You saw teeth, and fangs, and scales, and you didn't run. You simply asked, "Why are you here?" And that changes everything. So now, let your breath slow. Let your hands rest. No swords to grip. No riddles to solve. No trails to follow. Just the quiet warmth of your own body settling down. Your muscles remembering what it's like to relax. The ground beneath you is steady. The wind overhead hums in low tones. If you listen closely, you might hear the gentle rustle of asphodels swaying, or the lazy lapping of Lethe's forgotten shores. It's far away now, but it lingers, just enough to remind you that the journey happened, and you made it through. You're safe here. You're held. You're home. Let the monsters fade into dreams, not as threats, but as companions soft-footed and story-wrapped, curling into corners and waiting with patience for your next visit. But that will be another night. For now, rest, close your eyes. Breathe easy, the story's over. And you're still here. Sweet dreams.